went and did some of my first deer classics with the display of heads. And a gal come up, she says, "What does that mean? 243 and 5/8 BC. What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, that deer was shot 243 years before Christ." And she goes, "Oh."
How funny.
And we're back.
Hey.
HUNTR Podcast, episode 65.
6.
I thought it was
one
6.
behind. I can't count that far.
66. It is March 10th today.
Yeah, it is.
Got some guys doing some clearing behind the house today.
Yeah, man.
Opening up some food, man. That's what I said. Listen, I'm on track. I said I am going to add food to my properties this year. That is priority number 1. And then priority number 2 is I did do a bunch of TSI work last weekend. So I'm getting there.
Better man than I am.
I'm getting there, man. Little by little.
I haven't been out.
I've actually made a valiant effort to get it done, but we'll see. I mean, one could argue that food is the biggest impact to change on a property. So
yeah, well, it's a big deal for sure.
So we'll see. Not a huge amount, but we're basically adding about an acre clearing to an existing small plot. So that'll at least give me some more tonnage. Yeah, feel pretty good about where we're going. And I felt really good because it was like 40s and 50s and then 70s. And now we're supposed to get like 6 to 8 inches of snow this weekend.
No, get out.
Nope. Friday night into
Up on
Saturday.
the mountain? Not here, right?
Pittsburgh's supposed to get 4 to 5.
Get out of here.
Yeah, Saturday's going to be a snow fest.
What?
Yeah.
Hold on. I got to confirm this.
It's confirmed.
Today's 50 and sunny.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's 54 and 2 inches of snow.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday is 1 inch of snow.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Next week looks beautiful.
Yeah, it does.
50, 60. Next Thursday is 70 and sunny.
Love that.
So hopefully that's the last snow of the year then.
Yeah. So
Better be.
yeah, no doubt. Well, I was gonna go to the new Ohio farm tomorrow. I think I got too much stuff going on, so I might push it till next week.
So topic of the day, antlers.
Antlers.
Critically
important.
Yeah. So whether you've been shed hunting or haven't started yet, or you've been out once like I have.
I know, man. I feel like I started off hot. December 23rd, match set, ready to rock.
Give me just a touch more of him, Colton.
Give me a touch.
Give me a touch.
And,
I know I had to back it off, but need a little more.
But yeah, then been on a dry streak since.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I haven't found anything. I found, I found a little year and a half old shed deer, but
yeah, I mean, I think the now's a great time. Between now and the end of the month is a really good time, and it's one of my favorite times just to be in the woods and look at sign and bedding areas and everything about that. So yeah, I think it's a really good piece. But antlers and the fact that I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have been to like Bass Pro's King of Bucks trailer and seeing all these replica mounts. Like, first of all, most of those are not the originals, right? If you didn't know that, sorry. It's like telling you there's no Santa Claus. Yeah. Second is that those are done mainly by one company, and that company is called Antlers by Klaus, of which we are fortunate today to have Klaus Lebrecht.
We'll ask him to confirm. Yeah, but Klaus, Klaus, a legend in the antler industry. Like if, we think that we love antlers. And I do, I really do. This guy's got his whole business and his whole life is really based around, preservation of trophies. I think maybe at one time it started specifically with antlers and over time has evolved to trophy rooms. I don't know to what extent.
Oh, I'm excited to hear about that.
Of taxidermy, if they're actually doing any of that or if they work with taxidermists. But you've heard us talk about Pretty Boys, that buck I missed in Kansas several years ago. This is how we connected with Klaus, I think, for the first time, was that I sent him that antler, or we did.
Yep.
And it sounds like that's just about done. He's been kind of repairing that for us. It just had a little bit of
some squirrels got on the tines in the end of the beam, so we had him repair it. And then I think where the real kind of like artistic capability is like literally it looks like brand new.
Yeah.
Or it just had come off the deer's head. But yeah, so Klaus had been, Antlers by Klaus was in an Innovation Zone booth at the ATA show probably, God, man, it may have been even 10 years ago at this point. At least 8 years ago. next to us when we were working at the Deer Grow booth. And that's kind of how I met them. And so when that came up, it was like, oh yeah, like, dude, this is the guy. This is the guy you send it to. And I think at that time we're like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. Now you start to realize the breadth of like what this guy actually does and what he's like worked on. And you're like, oh, like, no, he is the guy, the only guy.
Yeah. So it's an honor to have him on the podcast today. You know, I think we're going to definitely learn a lot about antler preservation and antlers themselves. And like, dude, what better to spend 2 hours talking about? So
yeah, for sure. Let's bring in Klaus. There he is. Hello, sir.
Okay. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing good. We appreciate you coming on the HUNTR Podcast today, Klaus. Can you, just for clarification, so Jared and I don't butcher it, can you pronounce your last name for us?
Lebrecht.
Lebrecht. There we go.
Perfect. I didn't know if it was French, like Lebrecht.
It's actually German. It sounds like French Canadian. Yeah, I'm actually Canadian. That's where I was born and kept my citizenship. So.
Oh, no kidding.
There you go.
Here, how's this for a German last name? My last name's Prussia, like East Germany.
Prussia.
Old East Germany.
That's where my dad came from.
No kidding. That's probably where my great grandfather came from.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's
How
where
about
it came
that?
from, yeah.
Yeah, with a name like Klaus, we could kind of figure it was German.
Yeah.
Well, perfect, sir. Well, we greatly appreciate you coming on this morning. And I guess just kind of as a starter for a lot of our listeners, can you give us a little bit of background about your business there?
As far as how we got going?
Yeah, I think that would be the greatest start is like, I think one thing that Jared and I talked about is, we kind of knew of, quote, Antlers by Klaus, right? And we had heard it in passing, but then all of a sudden you start to put the puzzle pieces together of all of the places you might see your work. And it's like, oh, okay, this is the authority in this space. So I think a lot of people would be interested to just, hear a little bit about kind of what drew you into, call it the antler business, I guess.
Well, it was kind of a weird thing. I wasn't exposed to hunting as a child or, a father or parents or friends that took me out hunting or anything. So my interest in the outdoors was there. I did a ton of fishing and so forth as a child, but never any hunting. And then as I got, I was about 20 years old, and my brother-in-law was a hunter. And so I did a little, he introduced me to it, and I kind of sat with him a few times in a deer blind during gun season. And well, long story short, I bought a bow and got into the whole hunting thing, And now today, that's all I do is just bow hunt. I don't do any gun hunting or anything like that. But that introduced me to the whole world of the taxidermy and all that kind of thing. And I was, in the early years of my life, I was a drywall contractor and fell into that just as a thing to do, and, became a business and so forth and so on. Wasn't my life stream to be a drywall, guy. And had a passion for the hunting and the outdoor sports and stuff. And so as time went on, I was still very young, and I thought, I don't want to do this, my entire life, finish drywall and so forth. So I just decided to get involved with the taxidermy as a business, and, went at it really, really hard because I wanted to replace what I was doing with the other company that I had. So it took me about 3 years. And on my third year, I went and saw Joe Meter and learned how to do, become really, kind of a master at the whitetail thing. And that's where I was introduced to the antler reproductions. I knew of them existing, but I didn't know that whole world of antler collecting and the antler reproductions. Became quite a fan of North American Whitetail and the magazine and all the different bucks they profiled in there. So I gravitated very quickly towards the trophy whitetail part of the industry. And so at Joe's, I saw some replicas. They were being made by Mike Gillis at the time, and contacted him, bought several sets actually. I couldn't afford real antlers because they were, on the low end, several $1,000s up into the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 range for a set of antlers if they were noteworthy and large.
For whitetail antlers.
Mm-hmm.
$80,000 for a set of whitetail sheds.
Yeah, I know one the other day. Just the biggest purchase price. I don't want to name names, but one was sold here less than a year ago, probably 6 to 8 months ago, for $150,000.
Wow! And what would that? Is that just based on score or just the reputation of those antlers?
It's based on what one guy wants and the other guy's willing to pay.
Supply and demand, my friend. And Klaus, are those like high fence sheds then, or is there a difference?
No, these are historical deer.
Yeah.
Usually state records, things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of them just sold. I mean, that $100,000 range has been met several times.
Wow. So that would be like if people were selling bucks like the Jordan buck or hole in the horn, or like those famous.
Yep.
Interesting.
If the Jordan buck was available for sale today, I'd venture to say that would easily go over 100,000.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
What is it about those deer that like makes them so reputable and thus their antlers so valuable?
I mean, still some of the largest deer free range that have ever stood on hoof. Is one.
How big is a Jordan buck?
Jordan buck's over 200, 206 net.
Yeah, 206 and an eighth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I mean, real life. I mean, there's lots of 200-inch deer killed in Iowa. I mean, do those guys like with those shed? Are those worth a lot of money or?
Well, if you're looking at antlers, you just said there's a lot of deer that score over 200, and the problem, and that statement is very true, but it is reflective of the Boone and Crockett scoring system or the Polk and Young scoring system, which has an asymmetry rule.
Sure. Right.
So you have a lot of whitetails that have, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's quite a few that have a 200-inch net typical frame.
Yeah.
But then they got junk on them. Okay.
Sure.
So those antlers end up scoring less because you have to deduct the asymmetry and then also the non-typical points. Generally speaking, in the wild, once a deer reaches 200 inches, that's kind of the max point, and then you start seeing the sprout of additional times, and so forth and so on. And you have what I call low-scoring non-typicals with giant typical frames, and they many times will visually look much bigger. You go, well, that's the Indiana state record right there. And you look at it and there's a buck next to it that scores 218 and 4/8, and it blows it away because it's got a giant typical frame and very little non-typical. Yeah. So it's really hard in the scoring system to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges.
It is very bizarre. I can remember Klaus seeing a guy that killed that Tennessee buck several years ago. I don't know if that's the world record.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing him carry the actual set of sheds around, and I was like,
it's not that big.
It's not very impressive.
Yeah. Because the frame was 145 inches.
Yeah, very bizarre. Very bizarre. We believe nets are for fishing here in class. So when I say that there's lots of 200 inches out there, obviously I'm talking gross screen scorers.
Well,
on the back of a truck bed.
I think it's interesting because when we brought up the Jordan buck, which is one of those ones that just seems very iconic in terms of when people see it, like they know what it is, and it is. I mean, it is a 206, a little over 206 inches. Like it is a freaking monster. I have to believe that, and I guess this is circling back to your point where like, oh, there's a bunch of 200s.
Well, and literally I'm thinking of like Winky's G4 buck. Could he go and sell those for 80 grand?
Maybe.
You know what I'm talking about? Bill Winky is Midwest Whitetail. He's like kind of a legend in our industry.
That buck probably netted 180s.
Did it?
Yep.
Okay.
So
really? a 180 class. It's kind of back in the day when we were first doing all this. I mean, even 170-inch deer, they were not that common.
Right.
Yeah.
And people think that, the historic season of whitetail hunting, you know, the older deer that, you know, the best has come and gone, and I would highly debate that. We're killing bigger deer now and more quantity of big deer than ever before because of management and people letting deer grow. You know, if you have enough land, several hundred or several thousand acres in one parcel, you can let the deer walk, and, you know, most likely you'll be there next year, and let them reach maturity before you harvest them. And that has produced, you know, so many giant trophies. I mean, the records are being broken at a rate now that we've never seen before.
Well, and you know, I guess that's kind of where I was going with that, Jared, is that, you know, and I'm sure there were, but like at the time that the Jordan buck was killed, there were not, like, that was such a extreme rarity to maybe, and again, you know, you got to add in the advent of social media and how we communicate, but it seems like, or appears that it's more common to kill 180s, 190s, 200s nowadays than it was.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
Yeah. And the real freaks, I mean, it's kind of ironic to say it this way, but the real non-typicals out there are the typicals. Because a deer rarely gets 200 inches and stays clean. I mean, the Jordan buck, I mean, if you go to the Breen buck, you got a 213-inch net typical frame on it. And then you got all the non-typical sticker points. There's several on the deer, which drop it back down and score. So, you know, when you put the Jordan and the Breen side by side, I mean, the Breen is definitely a much bigger visual looking deer than the Jordan buck, but deer just are programmed to only get so big, you know, and then the extra tines start coming on and so forth. And most non-typicals, I mean, if you have really strong non-typicals, they come out to shoot that way.
Yeah,
you know, that it's very interesting. I mean, they've learned a lot through the enclosure deer farming thing that's being done as far as how these antlers grow and so forth. If a deer is going to be big, it's going to be world class. It's going to come out right away. Its first rack, its second rack, they're going to be unusually large for the age.
Yeah.
They can't come out, you know, a little fork buck and then turn into the Jordan. I venture to say that Jordan probably his first rack had a 10-point, you know, main frame and was smaller, of course, but probably could have been as high as 120s, 130s for his first rack.
Wow.
You know, and many hunters attest to the fact when they're hunting, they go, "Oh man, I got a 130. I've never seen him before." That's probably because last year he was small, but he jumped a big jump. And when you see now with people collecting sheds and you see bucks that, you know, will jump 60, 70, 80 inches in one season.
Wow.
You know, and that's because they got the right stuff. They have to. They're not gonna be around long enough. If 6.5 is that magic age of maturity for antler growth, you know, they've only got so many years to get there, and they're going to have to get a head start, so to speak, to get that kind of antler growth going. So they're just genetically superior deer that are going to do what they're going to do, and all the feeding and letting them go to grow. I mean, those all are factors that contribute to antler growth, but they are not probably the prime factor. It is the genetics that really have a lot to do with, and also stress on a deer will greatly affect its antler growth.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that, Klaus, is that, you know, you hear, and, you know, I'm guilty of it. You hear the age, nutrition, genetics, you know, factor conversation so much, and it is true, but as related to, let's get that deer to its best potential at maturity. If we're talking about the truly 1 in a million type deer in the free range population, the only thing that differentiates those deer is the genetic capability.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Thus it being 1 in a million, right? And so I think it's a really cool point that you talk about there when you look at that 200-inch kind of line, right? And it's there, and it's, you know, mystique for a reason. You just don't see many able to get over that line from a typical standpoint, you know, and I like a couple of the ones I'm thinking of just even off the top of my head, and it proved to not do what it was supposed to do, but was the king buck in Wisconsin not too long ago, which I mean was a massive typical, except for the fact, and it was debated, of a shared base. I can't remember, was it between the G2 and 3 or 3 and 4, Klaus?
It was between the 2 and the 4. There was the tine. Yep. You know, that was a stunted tine. I mean, it came off the top of the main beam, but visually, when you looked at it, because the way it played out, looking at it from side to side, it looked like it didn't belong, but it came out exactly in the same place that the opposing tine came out. And it was a big controversial.
And I mean, that broke that deer from potentially being a world record typical.
Interesting.
Just and again, is it objective or is it subjective because it's now down to a panel of judges to look at that and to evaluate and to say, no, that's a non-typical point. So it will not make the typical record book.
Well, the Johnny King, we could have probably 10 podcasts on that one. I know that deer and all the stories and the inside scoop, pretty much verbatim, because I was very deeply, I'm a very close friend of Jay Fish's, so I was privy to a lot of knowledge and information that many people weren't. But to put it very simply, the deer, a lot of people will bash or debate Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett, and say that I don't like their scoring system, I don't like this, and I don't like that. And my answer to that is, well, there's other choices. You got SCI, you got Buckmasters, they give you a total credit for the gross score of the deer, and you don't have to go through the asymmetry judgments and so forth, so on. But in the case of the Johnny King buck, I mean, the biggest travesty there was not that there was a judgment call. It's that the rules at the time that the deer was harvested by Boone and Crockett were negated and not applied to that deer. They chose to create some rules after the fact to try to discredit that point. And the Fair Chase magazine and all the different literature that they print and their manual and everything, you could not argue in any court of law that was a non-typical point.
Any court of law.
It's amazing. I've toured with the deer all over Canada, all over the US in our shows, and I've never had a scorer come to me and look at it and say, yeah, I can see why that's non-typical. They all look at it and say, that's a typical point. And they look at me to say, yeah. And I go, well, of course it is. That's not a hard judgment to make, Yeah. So unfortunately, politics and human egos and all that stuff gets blended into the mix, and that's what you come out with. So
it's very formal compared to, Jeremy and I live just like in the whatever you call it, the blue collar trench of antler scoring, where we're talking about gross booners, and it's like we know that's not a real thing, but it is interesting how the terms get applied, and it is especially interesting to me that Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett put so much emphasis on the symmetry of the deer. I'm curious how that kind of came about originally. Like, it seems like a preference. They would say, man.
Well,
it's a perspective of how you want to look. I mean, it's not a right or wrong question. I am a real fan of Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young. I have no issues whatsoever with their scoring system. But you do interject into the scoring system human, we're imperfect. We're humans. We make judgments. Our legal system is imperfect. It's a striving to get to the truth, but there's other things that happen, and it's not perfect. So the same with the scoring system. It's enacted by flawed human beings, and you're going to have, things are going to happen.
Yeah. So. What do you guys think about? I'm sure you've come across it a million times here, but the idea of displacement. In terms of dipping a set of antlers into a liquid that would show the volume difference. Is that something that's been tested, employed anywhere?
Yes, there is a system out there. I don't know off the top of my head what the name of it is, that does a water displacement measurement. The overall problem in antler how would I say, trying to rank one set of antlers against another, is that there are too many anomalies to be conclusive of all the possibilities that might exist. Now, as an example, a big argument many times against the Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett system is that they measure the spread. And they say you're measuring air, and that's an argument. It's a valid point. You're measuring air. But I would also say, any one of us as hunters, if you see a buck walk out with a 14-inch spread and you see one walk out with a 24-inch spread, even though they may have about the same amount of tine length and so forth, the 24-inch spread buck is going to get your attention because he looks bigger.
Right.
So when you're saying what makes a deer look bigger, well, the spread has a big factor to that. It looks much more impressive when you got the big spread on the deer. So, is that a measurement that should or should not be included? I believe it's very important in trying to communicate to someone what that deer really looks like. It's going to be very, very impressive.
If I may, Klaus, just devil's advocate, if I can use your own statement and say, like, well, if that's the case, wouldn't we also want to see, like, you see a clean cut 10 point versus one that's got trash everywhere? To me, I'm gonna say, man, that thing with trash everywhere is gonna catch my eye. I would advocate that, man, that should be a part of the score.
Yeah, and you have in Boone and Crockett, and even Buckmasters has what they call composite score, meaning that originally Buckmasters would not give you a spread credit,
right?
And then later on, because people could not relate to the lower numbers, they put together a thing called composite score. It's not the score of their deer in their system, but it gives you still that measurement with the spread added in. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm a guy that likes the character in a deer. If two bucks walked under my tree and were initially the same size, but one had a bunch of trash on it, the one with the trash is the one I'd choose.
Interesting. I was going to ask you that specifically.
Yeah, I'd be the same way. But getting back to the real question, and I want to make a point about that, because I hear the debate so often, in the circles of people who collect antlers, and I don't like this, and I wish they did this way, and I wish this would be that way. It'd be like you and I sitting down discussing what was the most beautiful girl in Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's objective.
Right.
I can't tell you, well, I like the shape of her nose, and therefore she's the best looking girl.
We'd have to build a scoring system, right?
Yeah. There is no way to determine that other than, you could take a poll and say public opinion has this person as the considered by more people than not as the most beautiful Hollywood starlet ever to come out. It's objective. And the same thing in the deer world, when going into the scoring system and saying, this is a world record, that's a world record. SC High has their score and they score differently. In some instances, it's essentially the same, but there's some little nuances that are different. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, it's objective.
Yeah.
And you have to look at the scoring systems as just that. They are objective. They are a certain criteria developed by an institution to look at a deer from a certain perspective. And that's all it is. And it's hard to say, wow, look at that buck. When you look at it and say, that's the world record, it might have the inches. The current world record before Luke Brewster just shot his, 14-inch wide deer from Tennessee, just loaded with tines. It does not fit the general concept of what people would say, wow, that's a world record. I can see it because it's so big. Right. It's actually very compact, but has a huge amount of tines, and that's where it gets its score. So
yeah. I think what's interesting too is when you start to think about scoring, because I've heard it from both ends. People are really quick to say, well, scoring ruins hunting, right? The score by scoring bucks and focusing only on score and stuff ruins hunting. But at the same time, it's kind of like, how else do you say that like that deer is the best, like is the biggest? Like there's no other way to do it. What are you gonna do? Say like, oh, that's just the oldest buck on that ever? No, you're not gonna say that, because it's unknown no matter what method you're using. So and that goes with any aspect in life. There's always some way to validate like this is the best athlete, this is the best car, this is the best whatever. And so it's such a hard critique that you hear.
The flip side of that is like if you use it against somebody to say, well, that deer's not valuable because it doesn't meet this criteria, like that's obviously not the point. That's not what we.
And I think that's where people take it too far, right? They take it too far on that aspect of it. But like when you get to the level of, because I mean, 9.9 out of 10 of us who are listening to this podcast will never shoot a buck that we say, hey, we need to get a Boone and Crockett panel together and we need to have this thing scored because it's got a potential to be the next record book deer. We're not. We're going to score it via our own hands,
just cool
gross, rough scored, that kind of thing. Yeah. But to the level of, there are deer being harvested every year that do need to have that hand touch scored by an expert panel. Because otherwise, how do we continue to progress? Who sets the next bar to say, what is the next? I mean, Milo's buck is still number one typical, correct?
Yes.
What will Milo's buck ever be surpassed? And there are plenty of people that say no, like it won't. I believe that it will. Like
I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
Where do you any idea or any gut instinct of what area you think that would come out of?
You know what? That's an interesting question. The upper Midwest would have been my answer years ago, but we're seeing the South produce stuff that we've never seen before. For just, there's the top corner of Arkansas has incredible deer. I mean, the whole state as a whole does not produce that, but all the southern states are coming on with surprise deer.
Interesting.
That we just didn't think we'd see come from those areas. Any place, anytime has a potential to do that. There's been so many contenders that would have had it and it been for a point, either a broken point or a point that sticker point that drove the net score back down. There's plenty of deer out there that have 210, 215-inch typical frames, net typical frames. I shouldn't say a lot, but I mean, that's not an unheard of thing. It's not like it's never happened.
Yeah, it's all over it. It's going to happen at some point.
The deer has a potential to still grow a big frame like that. The biggest problem is what I had mentioned earlier, for that deer to stay totally typical and not sprout those sticker points and things that would drive it down in the Boone and Crockett scoring system. The Milo Hansen buck, now I just had it told to me by hearsay, but I've been told it's a 3.5-year-old deer. The James Rath buck was 3.5. The Kurt Van Lith buck was 3.5 years old. That's the magic combination. Great superior antler growth at a young stage, because I believe if those deer get really old, that's just Mother Nature's going to start popping out those sticker points, and there goes your
I see.
Well, and that's
how many guys. I mean, I can tell you hunters, that pass on a deer only to see it shrink the next year. Say, oh man, it's going downhill already. His best rack was the year I passed on him and stuff. So antler growth is it's not a science. There are some things you can apply to it, but there's always the exception to the rule. And I've heard of deer, getting big, dropping down, and then in the late stages of their life, when we're talking 9 and 10.
Grab that antler right there, Jimmy.
Years old, grow their best rack,
Klaus, this antler right here is off a deer that we called Wide Boy out of Kansas. And to the best of our knowledge, that deer is probably 9 or 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. And this was his best antler. He had the first year
by far, right?
Yeah, the first year we had him on, he was a mainframe 10, probably in the mid 150s, and then had hovered that 150 to 155, and at that point was 5 or 6 years old. Went downhill, and then this year I unfortunately stuck one in his shoulder blade, and as you can see, this is a shed, so he survived. But he would have grossed somewhere in that low 180 range as a 9 or 10-year-old buck.
Yeah,
and it was
and there's reasons for that a lot of hunters don't understand. Take that buck, for instance. Here's a possible scenario as to why that deer grew his best rack that late in life is stress. And that's something that, again, the deer farmers really picked up on. in the early stages of deer farming, when Boone and Crockett's were hard to even raise, all the genetic manipulation and the pedigrees and all that hadn't been tracked. They didn't understand it yet. So here's a farmer, he raises 180-inch typical in his pen. And, everybody wants to get that deer. So some guy buys it and he brings it into his enclosure and he releases the deer. And the deer runs around, breeds every doe in his enclosure. He's got, say, 50 does in there. Next year, the thing's rack is just, it looks like a fork buck. Just nothing there. And that's when they began to realize that you can't stress a deer out. That breeding is a very stressful activity for the deer, the rut, and that's all that deer's got on his mind. He's not eating. He's not taking care of himself. He's just working off his fat reserves to rut and chase around does. So now the breeders will quarantine their best pedigree does with their best buck. And it might only be 4 or 5 does in what they call a breeding pen. And that's all that buck will breed that year. But now you switch that mentality out to the wild and you got a buck who's dominant. And he's been dominant there for 2-3 years as the buck breeding most of the does that he can get. And if he runs himself down and you get perhaps a hard winter to go with it, he's not going to pop back next spring and start growing another giant set of antlers. His body may have to take a break. He may have to replace all the loss of nutrients and things that he had in his system. And that's what Mother Nature is going to tell that deer to do versus grow a big set of antlers. Now, he gets older in age, and now he's kind of like us guys when we get older. The breeding season is no longer that important to him. He's not like, he's not the teenager or the stud anymore. He's kind of like grandpa walking around saying, well, I've been there, done that. And he may be involved in the rut and he may breed some does, but it's not to the level that he used to.
Yeah.
And so as that tapers back, it's a possible explanation why a deer late in his life will grow a better rack because he's not so stressed. And he enters the growth season of antler growth with a body that's in just better condition than a post-rut depleted buck that just chased himself silly.
Yep.
How interesting. Is there research to show rut activity declining over a deer's life? And at what point does that start to happen? Like what age?
Well, usually 6.5 to 7.5 is considered, peak, the buck's peak time as far as antler growth goes, and probably physical condition too. You're going to see, the guys that have deer in enclosures that see them get to be 11, 12, 13 years old, that's very old for a deer, even in an enclosure. But you can observe the frame and, even when the rut's there, the testosterone's no longer in the deer to that level that he's going to pump up and look like a giant stud buck in the rut.
That's interesting, man. That very well maybe happened to this deer.
Well, we've looked at a lot of stuff on the research side too, in that even when a buck is kind of not approaching maturity, but is getting older and testosterone is increasing from 3-year-old to 4-year-old to 5-year-old. Those deer are extremely active during the breeding season. Fighting, chasing, etc. As they get to that 5 to 6, it's not that they're not able to breed or they don't breed. It's just they kind of start to lay themselves back a little bit. And this is where the theory comes up and I think we talked to Ben Rising about it, is like a lot of these guys feel like some of these 5, 6, 7-year-old bucks that are the dominant buck in an area, like they basically just put themselves in a location where it's the does are there.
Flop on the side and lift the leg.
The does are there versus these 3 and 4-year-olds that are exerting a ton of energy chasing up ridges, down valleys.
Find
go. And they burn a lot. In fact, if you look at it, I would assume that most people that are out there finding deadheads that aren't because of either old age and disease and die or because of a hunter effect are usually that 2, 3, 4-year-old age class, because those deer are running themselves to death during a rut. And I've seen it. I've seen bucks 3 and 4 years old just really chasing hard in like February late. And it's like, man, I can't believe that buck's still chasing. 2 months later, I find him dead. Because he's been going since November 1 and it's February 28 and he's still going. their body just can't handle it.
So just for devil's advocate here, I mean, so somebody might say to that, like, well, dude, let's just shoot a ton of does. And so they don't really, exert that much stress.
You'll increase the competition, which will be just as much stress, I think.
Interesting.
So if and that's what not to go down the trophy hole too much, but like ultimately a lot of these people that have either high fences or have like true trophy properties are trying to manage even for like a 2 bucks to 1 doe type ratio. I can't even imagine the amount of stress because of competition. And that's where you start getting intense fighting, brain abscesses. There's no way around it, right? I mean, stress is just part of it. I do think the one thing you can reduce is population stress, right? And I don't think in many areas you're going to see the next world record contender come out of an area where the population density is through the roof. Mm-hmm. There's too much stress from a social and too much stress for food, limited resources. Yeah. It's going to suppress that animal. And if it does become a contender, it probably was the world record. It just didn't have the ability to express it.
Yeah. There's so much that's been learned in the whole deer, the biology part of it. And, and unfortunately, there's also a lot of still, I don't know what you want to call it, misunderstandings about the rut. Mm-hmm. I get a kick out of all the stuff I read. And I was kind of the gullible guy, bought into everything, when I was, reading. I was actually calling in deer. I was actually using my voice to call in deer before anybody had a call on the market, had actually built a deer grunt tube. I was telling my buddies and they were laughing at me. And they say, "What? He sounds like a pig." I said, "Yeah, you should see it, man. He's deer."
you still got it, Klaus?
Well, yeah. I mean, I still use my voice at times.
Can we hear it?
Oh, yeah. This is very simple.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I used to go out with just consumer grade camera, and I'd call deer into my tree stand with rattling. I'll go way back where before Noel Feather, before Tom Fleming, I read some things in some Texas books on rattling deer, and I got myself a set of deer antlers. And I asked my brother-in-law, I says, I'm going to go out and rattle in deer. And he says, "Well, that won't work up here." I says, "Why won't it work?" He says, "Because it works in Texas. It doesn't work up here." I said, "Well, why does it work in Texas and not here?" He couldn't answer me. And I said, "Well, the deer aren't talking to each other." So I said, if a deer thinks that there's a fight going on and they're going to come in and to investigate, I can't see that it wouldn't work up here. So, first year I rattled, nothing ever happened. But I had that buck come in that I didn't see. He was in a thicket, but he was grunting the whole way in. That's where I first heard it. And then I went to rattling, and I rattled a fork buck in and shot him with my bow. It was my first buck with a bow. And then I was hooked on it. And so I was doing a lot of those things, and there just wasn't anything in the magazines. It just starting, an article come in, rattle in your buck, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And I'm not purporting myself as a big hunter or inventor or anything, but it was just interesting to see, in the early stages of my hunting career, I started to do a lot with deer behavior. All the things I was afraid to try to do during the season when I had an open tag, as soon as I filled my tag, I'd go out every day and hunt just like I was hunting. And I'd bring decoys out, and I'd use scents, and I'd do all sorts of things. And then I'd bring my camera in the tree with me. And that's where I really learned, what works and what doesn't work, and what was true and what was false, by dealing with all those things. And
very cool.
It's amazing how there's so much out there still that people, talk about. Jeff Sturgis is one of the guys that's, more on the money than most of them. He's just got what he says is the way it is,
Jeff's a good friend. We've had on the podcast a few times.
Oh yeah. And I mean, when I listen to Jeff, because what Jeff did, he earned the knowledge on his own. He didn't read everything everybody else is saying. He went out and said, let's create a mock scrape. Let's get a licking branch going, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And really understanding how those things, how the deer interprets those things in its environment, it's really, really important. And it's the same with the antler growth thing. There's so many misunderstandings. He's a fork buck, and then he turns into a 6-pointer, and then he turns into an 8. No, if he's going to be a giant 10, most likely he's already 10 right out of the gate, you know.
What Jeremy and I have discussed, like it seems like with deer hunting, you know, maybe it does exist with other things, but like there's so much, like you're saying, misunderstandings. I think it's like misobservations. You know, I talk to it even in guys in camp where it's like we're hunting the same area, you know, the same weather patterns, you know, in some cases the same deer. And then we'll get back to camp and they're like, well, I saw this, and that. And like, you know, and I make fun of my dad, you know, but you know, he likes to say it'll be like, you know, October 1st. He's like, they're rutting, you know, cause he saw him running and stuff. And it's just, it's almost comical, you know, but I have to believe that's just my dad. And I, you know, extrapolate that over a population of hunters of like how many misconceptions are out there. It's just like, well, I saw him doing this. And so that means this, or I saw him doing this. So this, and you learn. It's just like how many guys are like, oh, I saw 180, you know, and you're like, okay, yep. So 140 probably. It's like,
well, yeah. And I mean, I think that's even like if you go back 30 years ago or more, you know, it was kind of what people would read in a magazine, right? That was what was accurate. Now take that on steroids to the level of what we have with YouTube and social media and multiple networks of television shows. And there's so much false information out there that, like, you know, 30 years ago, you know, everybody was an expert who deer hunted. Now it's 10 times worse. Yeah. You know, because you'll talk to someone and you're like, to your point, like, I saw 180 the other day. 10 days later, they send me a picture and I'm like, yeah, that's probably 150s. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, no, seriously. And it's because you've never seen a 180. Right? Yeah. Unless you've seen it on Outdoor Channel or whatever. You've never seen a 180 in the wild. Like, that is a monster of a deer. Yeah. And it's just, that's the way we've kind of been groomed.
It's hard to not, like, you know, I've had to catch myself of, you know, being a jerk about it, to be like, no, that's not, you know, you have to have some grace with people and be like, hey, listen, that's a great deer, you know, but I don't know if he's quite 180, you know, he's 150 probably.
Yeah, man. I think that the amount of information that's out there is a very big positive, right?
Yeah.
But it's and I don't want to say like big government type regulated, right? But it's not regulated, right? So literally anybody can go on YouTube, create a video, market the heck out of it,
unless it's about COVID.
Yeah. Well, then they're going to throttle you. And then basically, here it is. Here's the facts, right? And it's, you know, you leave it to the people to make the right inference of, I believe it or I don't. And the unfortunate thing is most of these people are just falling for it. Yeah. You know, they're like, oh, so-and-so said it. It must be true. And it's like, well, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, you know, I do so much. I do year-round surveillance with cell cams. And it's become, for me, it's almost become like a science, you know.
Yeah.
I like to learn what deer do and why they do what they do and so forth and so on, because it applies to my hunting. But I just made a comment the other day, a conclusion that I came to recently this year from all the cam pictures I've got, is that I think there's a big overrating on the idea that a buck is nocturnal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that anymore because I get pictures of mature bucks at all times of the day. I think it has a lot to do with, we perceive deer through our habits of living. Like, you know, we come home, we got a home, we got a bed. I mean, a deer doesn't have he has an area that he likes to hang, but a buck will hang in summer over here and rut 2 miles over here. Everything changes once that rut takes place. And those bucks are up on their feet moving a lot more than people think. And if you don't see it on your camera, you say, well, you know, he just shows up at night. And Jeff Sturgis alluded to this. He says, because you're hunting him from a distance from where he's bedding.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's so many things you learn after you've done more and more work that you say, that's just not quite true. And you know, the biggest bucks I've ever filmed, a lot of times I get them at 11 o'clock, 11:30, 1:30 in the afternoon. They're out moving around, you know, and it's not saying that that's a constant or that they're always doing that, but the whole idea, oh, he's a nocturnal buck. I'm going, no, he's not.
Yeah.
You're just not hunting him in the right place. I got one of my properties I lease is right in the core of a subdivision in the city limits.
Yeah.
So I'm hunting city deer, but on private land. And I had a buck this year I was after, and I rarely got pictures of him in the daylight. I mean, couple all season. And I said, I didn't conclude that he was nocturnal. I concluded he was living in the subdivision somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when he got up out of his bed, he was eating off feeders and apples and all sorts of other crap. By the time he got out to the fields, it was 15 minutes after shooting, a half hour after shooting. Finally, we got our first snow. There he was, 1:30 in the afternoon. He was out.
Yep.
And he wasn't nocturnal. I just wasn't close enough to where he was bedding.
Yeah.
To intercept them. And I can't just set up a tree stand in people's backyards,
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a big piece of in cell cams have absolutely helped this, but even still, no matter how we observe deer, unless like we're in the situation about to kill that deer, we're always a step behind, right? It's like when we used to just have regular trail cameras, I remember going and, I would still try to check my cameras at least once a week. I'm already behind. Like if that buck came through in daylight 3 days ago, I'm already a step behind. And I think what happens with people is, take the early season. If they're watching a bean field or something all summer, there's the bucks. They hang their stand on that bean field. A week into the season, beans are combined out and they're like, yep, he just left. Well, there's 300 acres of woods behind you that he's probably in, but all your observation is still on a field that he doesn't come to anymore because there's acorns in the woods.
Yeah.
And it's just, we are always, and even with cell cams, a couple of years ago, I was hunting a giant buck here on the mountain, and especially for Pennsylvania. And it's like, I knew he was going to come through this spot. It was within a 4-day window. And I planned on killing him the next day, and damned if that evening he didn't come through with the first doe. And it was on a cell camera. I'm already too late. I missed it.
Yep.
It's gone. Chance is over. And so does it help? For sure. And this goes back to, like, I know a lot of people beat up on cell cams of like unfair advantages. I do think it's a huge step over, original trail cameras.
Huge.
But the time you get the picture, if you are truly using those cell cams to hunt a deer, by the time you get that picture, you're a step behind unless you're in a position to kill him.
Yeah, absolutely. And the strategy that I use now is I've always moved towards simplification. If I see a buck doing something habitual, whether it's night or day, I've hunted now, this will be my 4th year. I've never hunted another tree stand, but the one I hunt, and I hunt it every single time I hunt because I can come in through the back door of the subdivision. I don't go through any habitat that the deer are in. I don't spook deer coming in and going out. It's a unique setup that I've got, and most of my stands would not be conducive to something like that. But I park myself there because I know what my cameras are telling me. I will kill that deer. It's just a matter of when, and it's happened every year. I mean, it's just the way it works. But I don't hunt, say, oh, he was there last night, he'll probably be there in the morning. I just say, okay, in the last 7 days, he's been there 5 times.
Yep.
Okay. And he's coming. And then sometimes he'll be gone a week and a half, and then he's back. So I just say, just believe in what that camera's telling you. Stay there. Don't jump around to other stands trying to find him. Just stay there. He will make a showing. And sure enough, I killed the one 2 years ago. I killed him 2nd day season because, and he just showed up. The buck just showed up. It was 2 weeks before season opened up. I got my first pictures of him. He hadn't even summered there. He just started moving around a little bit, and but I go, he'll come in. This will be where I'm going to kill him, and then I just sit there and hunt until it happens. But I can't do that in a lot of my stands. I just it's too much exposure, too much back and forth. The deer pattern you, and they're not going to come through the one you want anyway. So.
Yep.
So is that stand primarily tied to like an early season pattern then? You said you killed that buck on the 2nd day. Is it you kind of see bucks move in, and is that dependent on a food source on a nearby field?
Yeah, I mean, that one there was a little luck. I mean, I saw him move in, and then I hunted the first night. I almost got him the very first night, and he came in with 3 other bucks, and they turned and went or they came into my area, and then the other one went the other way. I knew where he went. I go, I got a camera over there. I bet he's sure enough, there he is. I said, it's just a matter of where he turned and left. But then I came back the next night, and then he came right in, so it worked out really good. But I've done that. That works for me. It's how you evaluate your information. But like Jeff talks about so often, I mean, the greatest damager of a person's hunting area is usually the guy himself. Sure. He doesn't know how to hunt it. How you get in. The biggest question you got to ask is not, is this a good tree stand? Is how do I get here and back and forth without alerting the deer to my presence, either through scent or just visually them seeing me coming and going. I mean,
100%. I mean, that's my biggest issue with like regular trail cameras is not just the fact that it's giving you post relevant information. You have to go and intrude on that area to check it. And and that's the real reason that I say, man, cell cameras are a huge advantage over regular cameras. You're getting real-time information without intruding on the area.
Yeah.
It's totally different.
Yeah. Well, and I used to, because I've been a trail camera nut for as long as I can remember. And I probably messed up more hunting because I would check cameras way more than I hunted.
100%.
I've had invitations to hunt some really good property, but then I hunted one time with them, and I saw what they were doing there in every day, full cards, and I go, it had great deer, but I said, any smart buck is not gonna be moving around with that amount of intervention that you guys do here, and I just don't go there. It's got what I want, but you're hunting it wrong.
Yeah,
and the only time they kill stuff there is when the bucks are willing to let down their guard during the rut and take the chance of running around and go into those areas and be active. And you get them. So.
Well, Klaus, it's so encouraging to know that like you're living this stuff. It sounds like you really love the whitetail deer. And you love to hunt. Like it's we don't know until we get to know you a little better. It's like, is this a guy that just is like an artist at heart and he just likes to do that side of it?
Well, I guess that's where I was gonna.
You're a freaking deer hunter, man.
I love the discussion we're in. I almost want to fishtail it because where I'm confused, Klaus, is the fact that you were a drywall guy. And now you're literally a wildlife artist. And like, how did that fishtail even happen?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I was young as a kid, I did a lot of artwork. In fact, my earlier years, I made, money painting pictures for people, commissioned pieces. I was about, I think, 13, 14 years old when I started painting.
Wow.
Pictures and so forth. And then, I kind of pursued it. I got schooling for it and everything. And, I had kind of the intention of pursuing an art career, but I saw, Wild Wings was around, all the great artists out there, Michael Sieve, Carl Brenders, all the big names in the art world. It's like, there's so many of them. It's like a person saying, I'm going to become a singer, Well, you may have a great voice and be very talented, maybe even more talented than people who are in the industry, but it's who you know, and the whole breaking into that field is really tough. So I kind of turned the art into just a hobby thing, that I do. And then this whole taxidermy, antler replicating thing came along, and that's when I saw an opportunity to apply my abilities in art to something that had it was a viable thing that people want. People want taxidermy. People wanted the reproductions and so forth. So, then I could take my talents there and apply them to something that really could make some money.
What was the first step there, Klaus? Did you like have some antlers laying around, or like were you into shed hunting? You're like, I wonder if I could, bring these things back to life, or.
I did a little bit of that. I actually made a mold with a bunch of drywall compound one time.
There's the drywall coming back.
I couldn't get the antler out of it. It was encased in it afterwards.
Oh, no.
So I had a chisel and I was banging away.
Hopefully not $100,000 antler.
Yeah. Break that thing out of that mold that I built, So I always had kind of an interest in that. Obviously, when I learned how to do it, it was a totally different method of how to make those things. But yeah, it's just always been I don't know, a passion of mine. And I'm different than a lot of guys in that I look, if you shot a big deer, I could come up and have every bit as much excitement and joy over that deer, even though I didn't shoot it. Just the fact that I can maybe hold it, look at it. It's not ego driven, it's not, it's not like, oh, for that deer to mean something to me, it's gotta be me that shoots it. I have no qualms, every time I paint a Jordan buck, as I'm painting, anytime the memory of the story comes back as I'm working on it, because I know it inside out, and the chances of that deer resurfacing after it was brought to the taxidermist was, almost miraculous that it didn't end up in a dump or, lost to history. And here we are, we can rejoice and celebrate that deer.
Klaus, I think for Jeremy and I, like a lot of that satisfaction comes from seeing a shared passion, like for the wildlife, and so like if we can, like, Jeremy's got young boys that he takes out hunting. I've got some people that I'm like kind of mentoring into bow hunting, and like, so we have the opportunity to like share our passion with them, and they see how much we love it and how excited we get about it. And I think they start to understand why, they see the work that we're putting in, they see like the obsessing that we do over these things, and that starts to rub off on them. And so when I see, whether it's my dad or people that hunt in our camp, or these people that I'm mentoring, or your boys realize what they've got there, and they're like, man, I worked for this. That's when I'm really like so happy for that guy, and on the flip side of things, you see, and there's nothing wrong with this either. Somebody just gets lucky. They're like, hey, it's my first time hunting, or, they just, and they kill a giant buck. It definitely happens. There's a big luck factor there. And it's not that person's not deserving of it, but it's almost like, man, I wish,
we just want you to appreciate it. I mean, the weird thing is, and it's for as long as I can remember, at least since I was like 9 or 10, like I love deer, like, but I've got no problem saying it. I remember when I was a young kid, I used to go to the Penn State deer research facility.
Jeremy is a deer biologist, by the way, Klaus.
Which is what drove me to this stuff. I remember being 6, 7 years old, feeding deer poison ivy or whatever. Probably my mom was yelling at me, through the fence. And so like when I went to school there, I think it was my sophomore year, a job opportunity came up for me to go work at that facility. And it was like, it's the greatest thing that I've ever had offered to me. And I was like, oh, and I get paid? Like, this is great. But like, I'll just come and and it's just always been, and I don't know, everybody has certain things that they love. I think it's just like, I have such a weird, deep respect for these animals because if you look outside, it doesn't matter where you are in the country, you're going to look outside some days and like, man, it would suck to have to be outside all day. Like how tough these animals are and what they go through. And then when you observe, especially a mature buck or even a mature doe, when you observe that deer in the woods and she's 200 yards away from you and she knows you're there, it's just like, how is that even possible? And
to take that a step further, like deer are amazing, period. But to see a high scoring, fully mature buck in the wild within bow range, it's like, dude, there's nothing like it. Like I've said it to you 100 times. I can't believe this thing lives in the woods here.
Exists.
Yeah.
How is this even possible? Look at this majestic beast. It just lives here in the woods.
Yeah. It's well, and the one question I asked you earlier, Klaus, about where you thought it was come from is this year I laid eyes at 35 yards on the largest buck that I've ever seen in my life. And I've hunted and I've killed some big deer. And this deer is every bit of 210 plus gross, at least. And this was right outside Columbus, Ohio. And
giant.
It's a deer that I've seen now 3 years in a row. And each year,
we think
bigger,
probably
bigger,
5.5 this year.
5.5 this year. So could be bigger. And he's starting to throw his junk, but he is a pretty damn typical.
Yeah.
He's got a 200-inch typical frame because he's got 12-inch brow tines. And it's just one of those things. I remember when I heard him, it was November. When did you kill yours? The 3rd?
3rd.
Was mine the same day?
right around there.
It was either the third or the fourth. Yeah. I'm sitting in that stand, and I could hear a tending grunt coming down. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm in his wheelhouse. I know there's not many other mature bucks where I'm at. And this deer steps out on this trail at 65 yards. And the first thing I thought of is like, that's a pen raised deer. He was so big.
And his antlers were like real white looking.
Super white looking. Yeah. And I mean, I'm looking at this deer thinking like, this is crazy, and I've killed a 175 with my bow. I've hit a 180 with my bow. I've seen big deer.
Killed a 160?
Yeah, I killed a 160. I'm looking at this deer thinking, this is like, it was unbelievably like how big. Like I couldn't even keep my composure laying eyes on him. Yeah. And I never got the shot. I never got a clean shot at him. But just watching that animal, like we'll just have, like, I'll never forget that initial feeling of like, oh my God, that's the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life, you know? Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, and those are the kind of moments that I think as bow hunters, and again, this is not the knock to a gun hunter, but as a bow hunter, to have that such close, intimate encounter, and even though I didn't kill him, it's like that will like, I'll never forget that. I won't ever forget that. It'll be the only thing I think of between now and the next time I try to hunt them.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome experience. I've yet to have one like that. I mean, we don't have those kind of deer. Well, I shouldn't say that. We've had a couple in our lease that, have pushed that 170 inch range, but to see them on the hoof in daylight's been real tough.
We'll send you some pictures of that deer, Klaus. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
and what you just telling that story, I can place myself.
Well, and Jeremy, I'll tell you what.
I'll just get Klaus to price it out. I'm like, hey man, just make me a replica of this one so I can hold it at least once.
It's amazing. You put this dude in a stand and it's like, oh, there's a 200 edger. It's like the first morning, we were trying to pull straws or whatever, or we just like by chance he ended up in the stand where he shot this deer, and that's a
giant.
That is a giant, and that's the same year you shot this deer. So you'd have had a 160 in PA and a 180 in
well,
Kansas.
And we talked about it before we kind of got on with Klaus here, and that I do a lot of my scouting right now because I'm not afraid of bumping deer. It's the bare bones of the woods. Like I literally feel like I'm walking through and just like seeing things out of my peripherals that I would have missed in the past. And I think the other thing is, and I thought it was interesting that it makes sense now, Klaus, that you went in and kind of described that in and out process to that subdivision spot. I'm very much if I go in to hunt a spot, it is the day I think I will kill that deer. And it's because in my mind, in a lot of cases, to what you said later, the in and out, those deer either pattern me or they know I'm in there or whatever it might be as days go on. So, most of the deer that I've killed, that 200, it was like first time into that stand.
Yes.
Least amount of presence. And after that, you still got a shot, don't get me wrong, but it starts to slim down a little bit.
The best thing about this time of year, especially if you've already hunted a piece of property but haven't had time to really walk and scout the whole thing, is that like you kind of have an idea, like where so Klaus, I killed my first booner this year. That was my like big accomplishment. I killed it on a property that I hadn't.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I hadn't walked the whole thing. We just we knew how it laid from aerial maps, and I hunted it twice, and I killed the thing there. And I got to go back, a week or two ago to shed hunt it for the first time. And I was like, okay, I'm going to dive. I have an idea of where these deer came from and how this thing lays out. But now I've really got like an intimate, experience with that property. And I have so much of a better understanding now that I've got.
And I think it's critical, man. I mean, when you're sitting in that stand in October or November, to be able to mentally vision what that ridge looks like, or what this knob looks like, or what this valley looks like, is so critical to anticipate where deer may come from. Because, I mean, you could say, like, 9 times out of 10 they come here, and that time you're in the stand, they come from the complete opposite direction. And so just to understand how things work are really good. We were talking about patterning deer a little bit earlier, and Mississippi State did a really cool project. So they've collared all of these known age deer, these known age bucks, and they've been watching where they move. And so they took this 3-year-old buck on a pretty ag dominated area, and they looked at basically what they would consider the peak rut 1 week. And it was in reference to like, well, I know where that deer beds, right? And within that 1 week, that deer had used 10 different bedding areas.
Yeah.
Only 4 of those did he use multiple times. And it covered about 195 acres or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's one of those things. And again, during the rut, that deer's moving a lot more than maybe in the early season or in the late season when it's more bed food. But it is very too much to your point, Klaus, about those bucks aren't moving during daylight. They are. They're getting up and they're moving in circles in an area. We saw that buck in Illinois do it on camera this year at 1 o'clock, come in and bed in front of the camera.
Yeah.
He stood up and moved in a 30-yard radius for 5 hours, basically, before heading out. It's just, if you aren't seeing them, you're not in the right spot, or your camera's not in the right spot.
Or you've disturbed it enough times.
That's it.
I can't tell you. I mean, if a guy were to say, tell me what is the number one mistake made by a hunter, I said it's how he enters and leaves his areas.
100%.
That is the biggest mistake most hunters make. They'll go, oh, I walked across that clover field and I didn't jump any deer. You want to know how many deer bed at a vantage point where they intend to feed? They're at a place where they can observe that on high ground and look that whole thing over, especially if you're, in our areas here where it's real hilly. I mean, they bed down for a reason. They're using all that to their advantage. And you're thinking, oh, I didn't bump nothing. No, you didn't. They were smart enough just to sit there and watch you as a dummy walk in and out.
Yeah.
And they've got you figured out, that, oh, I'm not gonna be hanging around that spot and doing things there, So yeah, it's a lot of fun to just learn how to intercept the deer. Most nights I'm on stand, I could kill something. It's a rarity that I'm not in the action, and I come out every night just, if it's even a doe and some fawns come by me, at least I feel like, I put myself in the right place, and the buck I'm after can come by, but I'm doing the right things because I'm intercepting deer. And I view it like catch and release, like a guy catching a muskie and throwing it back, or, any game fish, throw it back in and you go for the next one. But I mean, it's a sense of accomplishment because you're what you went to accomplish, you did it. You didn't have to kill the deer to prove it. But
I love that point, Klaus. I think my uncle and I have had this conversation quite a bit about, guys being like, I can't believe you passed that thing. It's like where you're filming and it's like, we're passing on 2, 3, someday I'd like to be passing on 4-year-old deer. And my uncle has some really good wisdom on that. He's like, man, it's like just what you said, Klaus. It's like the thing was at 20 yards. I easily could have drawn my bow and shot that thing. But like the question you have to like ask yourself is like, man, after that's said and done, what's the outcome of that? You're like, man, I just have a dead deer. That it's just a dead deer that I have to like take care of and process. And if it's and so and it's a tough conversation I think to have. But like the negative result of shooting a deer that was not the deer that you intended to shoot or whatever, is just you just have a dead deer, and it's just kind of like
it's a sensitive conversation because a lot of people get really upset when you say that, in that they're like, well, that's the goal. Like my goal was to fill the tag, and that was my goal, and I did it.
Yeah.
And it's
and that is okay.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And it's one of the reasons that I usually in a given season I'll set out, depending on what area I'm in, for a particular buck. Now there's other deer in that area that if they showed up I would shoot. But I'm hunting it is a one-on-one with me and that deer. All of the moves and all the strategy I make are to kill that one deer. And if another deer comes back that meets my criteria, I will shoot it. But to your point, once I let that arrow fly, my decision's been made. And I'll be the first to say that I've had shooter's regret before of several bucks where I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to take that deer. In retrospect, had I maybe had more time to process it, I probably would have passed. But it was just in the situation. And that, that's just how my mind kind of operates on that stuff. But there are a lot of people out there that they don't hunt a deer. They just hunt bucks that are legal and punch a tag. And there's nothing wrong with that.
In a way, that makes it way harder because they're having to be like, if you're not familiar, this is one of my biggest advocating points for trail cameras is that like, the days of trying to age a deer on the hoof, could essentially be out the window. It's very much, that's that deer. All you have to do is identify them. If you're running trail cameras effectively, there's $3-4 you're looking for, it should be relatively doable to say it's that buck or it's not. Buck. Versus, is that a 3-year-old? Is that a 4-year-old? You know, in the spur of the moment, like there's a reason there's antler restrictions and not age restrictions.
And that's where most make mistakes.
You know,
well, and that's where like we'll get comments on this podcast, guarantee, about how big antlers and Boone and Crockett and scoring and whatever else have ruined deer hunting across the country. It is inevitable that it will come, just like people have mentioned the same thing about QDMA. QDMA has wrecked deer hunting across the country. Like they've ruined it. They've ruined it for people who looked at it purely as a hobby to go out and punch a tag. And I would agree with them. I think that the mass acceptance of this new wave of how deer hunting has been taken over has definitely negatively affected the people who just hunted a few weekends a year and their goal was to punch a tag, and they didn't care what it was. As long as it was legal and they filled a tag, that was success for them. It has negatively affected that. But the progression has been...
How so, Jeremy? Just like in the perception that, like, hey, you're not meeting an expectation?
Yeah, and antler restrictions coming in play. Now I can't kill the first spike that I see. Sure. Concerns of CWD in many states that have now said, listen, like, you can or can't harvest this. You have to harvest this first. Wisconsin's got earn a buck now. In a lot of places where they've got to shoot a doe before they kill the buck. I mean, there are a bunch of different things that have negatively affected the guy who literally just wanted to go out and kill the first deer he saw.
Yeah.
But as a society, I think that we have looked and moved forward to a place where this new generation of hunters, number one, I think respects that animal way more than it was just an animal that I was punching a tag with.
There's a spirit of conservation now.
Yeah.
And I think that is the difference between the old school killing and punching a tag. And people will argue against it, say, no, all you guys care about is big racks and private landowner and blah, blah, blah. I understand that. But the reason that I do those things is because there's nothing that makes me more happy than to go out and see deer on my own property, just being deer and just doing things that deer do. That is not how it was looked at in the 70s and 80s and early 90s in most places.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think every one of us as hunters, when you look back on your hunting career, so to speak, what you were doing when you were 30 years old compared to what you're doing now, or in your 20s or 50s, it's always an evolving and growing thing. I mean, I hunt for myself. I don't care what other people think about what I shoot or don't shoot. But I'm out there. I find more satisfaction in coming out of the woods, and I could hunt a whole season, not kill a deer, and still come out of the woods at the end of the year feeling I had a great season.
100%.
If I had, many encounters with different deer.
Yep.
And I could have harvested, should I have decided to do so. I measure my success that way. I don't measure it by having to have a tag filled.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff I let walk by, most hunters would be happy to shoot it.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm not there to make a statement in the community. Oh, Klaus, he gets his buck every year, and he always gets a nice one.
Well, Klaus, since you say that, Klaus, it's interesting because that is the mindset. How old are you, Klaus?
I'm 63.
63. So there's guys even younger. So in their 40s, 50s, I think is probably like towards the end of this phenomenon. But for a long time, like in this. The mindset was like fill a tag, and they very much wanted to be the guy that was known for filling a tag every year. Like that that was almost more of an accomplishment than like killing one big buck.
Well, I think what's interesting, so Klaus, my dad is 63. He's upstairs doing some work in this building right now. And what's interesting about him is he was brought in to hunting via mainly my mom's side of the family, who are very much we're the deer camp atmosphere. Like, hey, we're just out here to punch legal tags. And he did that for like a year. And then like very quickly, like I remember him like always being the guy that like held out. And I was confused, right? Because most of the people that I hunted with were shooting the first spike or 4-point at the time, and even to this day, like I remember hunting several times and I would watch him pass a buck. and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I didn't want to shoot that one. And it was such a weird foreign thing in the 90s, at least, to see that. And then as you start getting into the 2000s and things evolve, you're like, oh, I get it. And to that point, I've for sure killed more bucks than my dad at this point, but it's also because he grew up in hunting in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, of which people were dropping the first spike that they saw, and he's holding out for a 2-year-old 8-point or something. And it's a weird, there were very few people that adapted that mindset.
They were like the pioneers, though, of like modern, big buck hunting.
And frankly, we're probably looked at as the guys who they say that, but that's just because they don't kill anything.
Say that again.
And I mean, you can't fault people if they're meat hunters or just want to measure their success by, filling a tag. That's certainly their deal to do, I don't begrudge anybody.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, if that makes you happy,
I kill a bunch of does every year for meat.
Yeah, and for myself, I mean, when I look back, I mean, there was a time when, it was always like, I was so fixated on killing a Pope and young buck, and it's like, oh, I was just obsessed with that idea, and I have to get that accomplished, and and it started to destroy my joy of the sport because I was too focused on that aspect of it. Now that I've backed off and, I've got leases so I can control harvest and things like that, and the way it's hunted, it's become easier and easier to do that, to kill a decent buck every year. But in the same token, every night I come out of a stand, if I had a buck walk in and, one that, 15 years ago I would have shot in a heartbeat. It's amazing, the deer that I do go by, I would have killed to shoot a deer like that 20 years ago. And I just let them walk on by, and I look at, that, but it's enjoyable because, I mean, you used the word conservation. I mean, I'm very aware of what I have for deer, what is a mature doe that will be breedable versus a yearling or a fawn from the year, and so forth and so on. So I really watch the herd that I have very closely, and which bucks, are where, and so forth and so on. And that whole process is become the hunting. It's not anymore that split moment where you release an arrow and kill something. It's all those other things as a composite that make up the hunting season for me. And joy I find in it. It's not based anymore on those things. I've shared this with many other guys. It's the sunrises, it's the sunsets, it's the weather, it's those rare moments where you see the sun come down and there's a big bank of clouds that turns purple, and it's those memories that you have. And I'm sitting in a tree and I'm taking that all in. And a lot of people are just busy living life, racing off to get their kids from soccer practice, running to the grocery store, coming home from work. And I'm sitting here in nature and enjoying that. And that's, for me, what it's all become about. I don't have the killing thing is like kind of the cherry on top of the ice cream. It's at the end. I mean, it's what I'm there for ultimately, but still putting up the tree stands and all the camera work. If they said there's no more hunting, they shut it down, I'd be out there with my cameras as much as
100%.
Because I just enjoy so much tracking the deer. I mean, I watched one really nice big buck. I watched him till mid-June. We had kind of drought here this year. He was in a small thicket, using that for his bedding, and then using a bean field to feed in. And all of a sudden he disappeared. So I figured there must have been a water source back there. It was private property. And I looked at it from the air, but I couldn't tell. But I thought, I bet there was a water source. It dried up. He moved on. So I had cameras out in about a 2-mile circle, and I found him again about a month and a half later. And it's like, there he is.
There he is.
Yeah, he moved over here. And that is almost as exciting as shooting the deer.
I really love what you're saying, Klaus, about like the whole process being so enjoyable, and ultimately killing the animal is like the most bittersweet aspect of the whole thing. It's not a sadness as much as it is like a respect, or
it's anticlimactic, because when it happens and you're done, and that animal is now removed off the table.
Well, it's the first like it's over. Everything up until that point is like, this is going to work. This is my strategy. This is everything I'm doing to make this happen. And then at some point it's like, when you finally do that, that moment happens, and it's like the most exciting, it's the climax for sure, and then immediately, while you're overjoyed with the fact that it happened and that you were successful, it's sad, because this animal is not there anymore. That challenge is over. We've heard a lot of guys, I mentioned Bill Winke earlier. He was one of the first that really talked a lot about that, like farm feeling empty after he killed this deer he's been hunting for 3 years. It's like, who am I now?
No, I've had times where I just burst into tears after I shoot one. And it is that mix. It's not a emotion of sadness. It's an emotion of all things coming together, like an explosion of happiness and, understanding
disbelief.
Just took that animal's life. And, it's all the things coming together, like a flood of emotions that are almost like negative to each other, but you're experiencing them. And I've had that happen several times, where you're just a host of different emotions. I walk up to it and see it laying there, and I go, gosh, if I wouldn't have been around, you'd be around, another day to live. And they don't equate, I think, life in the same way we do, but I mean, they're out there living, they're trying to stay alive and everything. And here I took its life and everything. So it's important. Well, I think that we have that emotion. If we didn't have that anymore, I think it'd be a poor thing to do, to be in the woods hunting.
Well, I think that's one of the hardest things to like get across to somebody who's not experienced it, is to say, like what we just discussed is like, man, the enjoyment that we get out of it is like by investing in like the challenge. And ultimately, the act of killing it is bittersweet, if not sad. A lot of people who are not familiar with that experience or haven't experienced it for themselves are like, what do you mean? Like, that's the point. Like, I don't understand. Like, the point's to kill the deer. That's your deer hunting. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And
there's a group of hunters that think that way too.
Yeah.
They're like, well,
no doubt.
But like the reason you're out there is to fill your tag, right? And it's like, yes.
Yeah.
But on the right thing and in the right circumstance.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately, we talk about that, the climax of that hunt being the harvester, when you actually, kill that animal you've been hunting, is like, man, I've just really come to embrace the suck, essentially. Like the more things suck, the more years that go by that I don't accomplish my goal of killing a mature buck, it's like, I know that it's going to happen eventually, and it's like, when it does, like I said, it did for me this year. It's that suck, the fact that I struggled for that season, if not prior seasons, that made it like just so epic, and it's like, there's nothing like it.
Well, I think what makes it hard for some of those people who look at it as more of a fill the tag type of thing is they don't look at this stuff and enjoy it year round. Right? Like a lot of us who are looking in that standpoint of, we're building this momentum to this climax moment where it actually happens. I kill the buck or a buck that I'm after. And it's because of all the things. We're shed hunting now. We're doing habitat work. We're planting food plots. We're running cameras. And like all of that is in the 9 months leading up to the 3 months that we're actually in the stand trying to hunt. And I think that if you don't do that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with it, but if you don't do that stuff, it's hard to understand the people who live for it all year long. And it's mainly because
a fair statement.
You have other things that you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in concerts or sporting events or something else. And that's fine. But there's a group of people out there that you can critique, but you can't ever understand unless you literally do it all year long.
Listen,
and I think we have to, I'm very philosophical about my hunting, but I look at, each hunter needs to ask that real honest question to himself. Why do I hunt? There was a time in my hunting career, because of what I do for work, I felt the pressure of, you should be a guy out there killing big deer, because that's what people in our society would think. And I pursued that. And
I bet that was stressful, Klaus.
Yeah, it takes the joy, and you're asking yourself, why am I out here doing this? What is my real motivation and goal? And I mean, I think every guy that gets very serious about their hunting goes through that process of, analyzing themselves and saying, why do I go? I would never enter a deer into any record book, because I don't need that for myself. What it is what it is when I shoot it, and I'm happy if I say it's 140 class deer. That's good enough for me. I don't need to have it in magazines or put on my website, Klaus kills another one. I mean, it's just,
Klaus does it again.
It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not important to have that. And I think that all the guys that are really true sportsmen and true hunters, if you're at that level of hunting, are that kind of people. It's not about what everybody else thinks about me now because I harvested another nice deer or whatever. I certainly share pictures with my friends, but that's kind of where it comes and goes, and that's the end of it. But why do we do what we do? And it's a personal question that we don't have to answer to anybody else but ourselves. And really do that soul searching. But I have more fun hunting now than I ever had, and it's all the factors that go together. The preparation, we put in ponds, and we hunt public ground at times, and because just for the challenge, and so forth. So it's a lot of fun, and it's probably something I'll do to the day I die, because I just enjoy the outdoors and enjoy that so much.
Well, we talk about it a lot, and I've for sure fallen victim to that. Well, if I'm doing this, and whether I was private land consulting or even when we were doing more in the hunting industry side, it's like, well, people are going to expect me to kill big bucks, and like that's the pressure. And it ruined a lot of things, and I have to wonder what some of these people who are like a Don Higgins or Ben Rising or even a Jeff Sturgis, to a point where people expect these guys to kill at least mature bucks, and if not just mature bucks, like Boone and Crockett type deer. At some point, that weight is super heavy, and it probably, if you ask them why they hunt 10 years ago compared to what they do now, it's changed dramatically.
Well, Jeremy and I have spent a lot of time, I think, considering like what, what are those pressures, to kill big deer? Like, how do they impact? And I think, like, dude, even our conversation with Jeremy Eldridge last week is like, dude, hunting is freedom. Like that is us living out our passion, and it's not work, so it's what we want to do, and we're doing it the way that we want to do it within our legal right, but the second that you have a pressure, say, hey, that thing that is freedom to you, here's why you should do it, or here's how you should do it.
Exactly.
Immediately it's like, well, it's not as much freedom. And that's a negative in my opinion.
Well, and I think that, and some of these guys do really well, like Rising killed whatever, 4 bucks in 12 days. But I think a lot of these guys start to make mistakes as hunters because the pressure it's inevitable, right? If I'm feeling the pressure as the season goes on to kill, I'm going to make mistakes, or I'm going to be more aggressive than I should have been. I'm going to mess things up. And ultimately, that's going to affect their overall mentality.
Well, dude, the biggest mistake there is caving to the pressure to begin with, because right away, even if you meet that goal, it is not going to be as successful because you didn't experience the freedom along the way.
Them or our society. Like, our society expects Don Higgins to kill 180 to 200 inch deer.
Well, you put yourself in a position of, and there's nothing wrong with doing it. If you put yourself in a position of being known for that, or selling a service that's associated with that, there's some expectation that comes with that.
Right. When I look back on the whole industry, I was fortunate. I'd say for me, a lot of my success and our company, everything was a timing issue, because when I first got involved with all of this, is when the Boone Crockett scoring system, it had already existed for years, but it's when there became a public awareness of the system. You know, when we went, I went and did some of my first deer classics with the display of heads, and a gal come up, she says, what does that mean? 243 and 5/8 BC. What does that mean? And I said, well, that deer was shot 243 years before Christ. And she goes, oh.
How funny.
So, but I mean, the naivete that was there, I mean, now today, even people who are not trophy hunters per se, they understand the numbers to a certain level and understand that deer are being scored and there's a scoring system. So, you know, when I look back on the entirety of my career, I mean, all the outdoor celebrities were just starting out. Pat Reeves was still working down at Bucky's Taxidermy, you know, Greg Miller was writing some stuff for North American Whitetail. I mean, all of us kind of just rose, you know, in different areas. I was doing Antlers, but they were, you know, hunters and so forth, writing articles, eventually became hunting celebrities. But the evolution of where it all began, and then, you know, guy would shoot a deer on a video and up would come up, you know, 146 inch, you know, P&Y. I mean, it was posted right away, and we've moved away from all of that. You know, you don't see that as much anymore. And some of my favorite stuff that I watch now is the Jared with his adrenaline, you know. And,
whitetail adrenaline.
Yeah. I mean, we've done work, but I just saw him at the Deer Classic down in Iowa, and I love the hunting public guys because I like. I'm watching. I'm going, that's a mistake. Don't do that, you know. And then you see it unfold, you know, or I'll see him pull off something that's almost miraculous, you know. But what I like is it's real.
Yeah.
We're not editing. We're showing the disappointment. We're showing that you shouldn't have moved that. It gave you away. You know, you're showing all of that. And I go, that's the hunting. And that's how it really, really unfolds. For every attempt to be successful, you have probably a dozen under your belt that didn't go well, you know, that was a failure. So we have moved as a group of people from that obsession with killing, you know, a deer that had a number on it, to getting back to the basics of just, you know, it's nice to kill nice deer and big bucks, but it's also nice to go out and enjoy the experience. And I'm happy to have seen that thing, I think, come kind of full circle, where we're getting back a little more to the grassroots of why we do what we do. You know, it's not wrong to have a high standard of what you want to harvest when you go out there. That's not a bad thing, but keep it in its perspective. I mean, there's guys that'll watch these hunting shows and think they can go out in their backyard and kill 180-inch deer. Well, first question is, does one even exist?
Yeah.
Is there something that big out there?
Yeah.
You know, it's like watching a fantasy show. You got to know. I mean, my area where I hunt, I mean, 130s and 140s is about where the deer get, and then that they stop. And then you get those few that will go, you know, and those are hard to find and hard to pursue.
Klaus, we say it all the time. Like you can't kill a big buck if he's not there. I think there's here's, in my opinion, the biggest difference between a hunter and a fisherman, and there's nothing wrong with either one of them. You know, with mature whitetail bucks, especially, like, there is a very limited quantity of these things. Like, this is a very special animal. You know, it's taken 6-7 years, like you said, to get to this point of maturity. And, you know, like with fish, or, you know, even I won't call it an inferior species, but, you know, a different animal, like even turkeys. Mm-hmm. You know, there's quite a few of them, you know, and they're not as distinct, you know, like a steelhead trout is a steelhead trout, whether it's 33 inches or 36
nobody's
inches.
Passing on the 2-year-old gobbler. They're killing the hell out of them.
And there's a difference between an inch and 3/4 spurt. Like, I get it. You know, a whitetail deer, you know, and this carries over to elk and to other, you know, big game species, is like, these are very special, very limited quantity animals. It's not like you just stick one with an arrow. It's like, I'll wait for you know, the next one will come around the bend, you know, and it just don't work that way. They're very
and I mean, it's a reason. Like, there's a reason they got to that age. Like, they are the fittest of the fit, right? I mean, the fact is, it's you know, survival of the fittest out there. there may be 20 1.5-year-old bucks in the cohort. By the time they get to 5.5, there's 3 of them left.
Yeah.
Right.
And for all different reasons, hunters, vehicles, disease, whatever, like there's 3 left. And those 3 are the fittest of the group.
Yeah. Well, and dude, what a struggle it becomes. Like it's so hard. All we do is fail trying to kill one deer. When you introduce like a group atmosphere and you're trying to manage a group of hunters of, 5 or 6 people hunting a specific piece of ground, one guy can mess it up with 1 or 2 hunts. You multiply that by several guys, and you can start to see how difficult it is to kill one of these specific animals.
And it is hard because, the more that we do these podcasts and the more that I see, work with my kids to get them into hunting, like I miss the deer camp tradition and feel that I grew up with. Like that was just extremely important to me. And it never was about like, the night before opening day, like I was, I wouldn't sleep. It was like Christmas, right? But it was never really about tagging that deer on opening day as much as it was the 3 to 5 days we were all together in camp doing something that like we did once a year together.
Yeah.
And so like to figure out a way to bring that back was still keeping some sort of, standards basically. I think is the key to the future, because what we don't want, hunting is an individual sport. You're out there by yourself. Yeah, some of these guys have cameramen, but it's not like 2 or 3 of you are sitting in a tree stand or something together. It's an individual sport. But at some point, if you don't have somebody to share that with, you lose some of the joy of hunting, right? If I all of a sudden kill this 170-inch buck, and then I look at my phone and I'm like, well, nobody cares.
Well, yeah.
There's a bit of joy out of it.
Look at our trip to Kansas, man. Yeah. Like, it's not to say that if you drove to Kansas by yourself and shot a 180-inch buck that wouldn't be satisfying.
It wasn't nearly as fun.
But dude, we've got to a point now where it's like it's because you and me and your dad, and like this year I'm gonna get to bring my dad, which is I'm so excited about. That it's taken me some years to get to that point too, Klaus. I just turned 29, and so like I'm going through the like, hey, I just want to kill a big buck, and anybody that's in my way,
Yeah.
And but I'm coming around to the realization that like, dude, those are the fact that our dads get to come with us to a place as special as Kansas is like that's the big deal.
Yeah. No, it's a great sport, and I wish the younger kids would get more into it. They're all in their video games.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad that they're not, I tried with mine. It's amazing. I do what I do, and my kids, have no interest in it whatsoever, as far as getting out there. But anyway, it's a great sport, and I'm just glad to see where it's heading. I think it's heading in the right direction. I like to see the hunters get a little more together and not fight with each other. Like, a guy's shooting with a crossbow. Yeah, well, so what? The guy with the high-powered rifle shooting out 700 yards because he's a sniper. Where do you draw those moral lines and stuff? Let people give them the freedom to pursue it the way they like to do it, if it's in the parameters of the law.
Yeah.
And concentrate just more on looking at why we do what we do. You'll find more joy in it if you're pure in what you do, instead of these hidden agendas and motives and egos and all that stuff. The outdoor industry is just that's been the downside of the whole antler thing, is when you get the ego factor in on it. I'm always like, you had nothing to do with that deer or his antlers. You just happened to be the lucky guy that shot him.
Yeah, you pulled the trigger.
Yeah, you pulled the trigger, took his life, and the deer, like you had said just moments ago, surviving hunting seasons, surviving an injury, surviving car collisions, and all the different things that could take that deer out. He survived, and now you got, at the end of the day, out of a pool of a couple $100 that were born, 5 years ago, there's only a handful left that make that special spot. That's a pretty low odds. And then you come along and harvest that, you got to understand what you did. It's a
huge deal,
special accomplishment. It's not easy to do.
Well, and I think the people that have that mindset or that standard to say, well, that's what I want. I want a chance to harvest that mature buck, that kind of prestigious animal, are also the same people that quickly are going to say, well, there's a good chance I'm going to walk out of the season with nothing. And I'm okay with that, because the reason I'm out there is all of the sunrises and sunsets and experiences and encounters. And if I walk out of that season with all of my tags still in my hand, it was still successful. And that's a harder thing to do than people think. Like, a lot of people will say that going in the season, and then the first 3-year-old they see, they shoot. And that's not to blame them. It's just, it's the excitement. The goal is to shoot a deer. That's why you're hunting. But when you'll get to a point, I think it's to get there and get out.
Use me an example. So I'm 29. I've been hunting for, since I was 12 years old.
17,
like that was the league.
16 years.
Was it 16? No,
16 years.
I was 12 when I started hunting. So
16 years.
16 years. Guess how many bucks I've shot and killed?
Mm-hmm.
Probably 6.
Yeah.
Maybe less. Yeah. Guess how many I've shot at?
A lot.
But I've also, probably an additional 4 or 5. But I've passed on a ton of deer, and I say that not at all to brag or say that, hey, somebody else shouldn't shoot that deer or whatever. But I just, from a young age, and mine came from my uncle. He was the one that, like, in your guy, the age class above me, he was the one saying, well, I'm going to just hold off for a little better. And like in his part of Pennsylvania, that meant 3-year-olds. That there were no 4-year-old deer. He's just like, hey, everybody else is shooting 1 and 2-year-old bucks. He's like, I'm really intrigued by these, this upper age class of deer, which for him was 3. And that, him taking me spotlighting as a young kid, and ultimately, we've gotten a lot of opportunities to hunt together. It's like that's where from a young age, I kind of like took that from him and said, well, I'm also interested in, that type of deer, that type of pursuit. And so it's because of he and I's relationship, I think that progressed in me at a young age.
Yeah.
But
no, it's a great sport. I mean, there's an old proverb says, find something you enjoy doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And I guess I'd say that sums up my whole career in this industry. I mean, there's days where, it's the business end of things is hard, or, different challenges you come into, but rarely do I walk in and look at the clock and say, oh man, it's only 10 o'clock and I got 6 hours to go today. I walk in and I look at the clock and I go, oh, it's already 5 o'clock and I still didn't get done what I wanted to get done, and anxious to get back the next day and get back at what I was doing. So it's been a great career. The hunting aspect to it has been awesome. I have so many memories. I've hunted big game all over, the Midwest and stuff. It's just been a great life, to have, to enjoy all that. I wish more people could understand it. It's not the killing, it's the hunting, it's the pursuit, it's all the things that go into learning how to do it well. And that's what brings all the joy and the memories. So many of my memories are not just the harvest. There's so many other great memories and camaraderie and funny things that happen when you're out with your buddy putting up a tree stand, or something breaks down. I mean, it's just all the stories.
I mean, Klaus, I think your business is like just such a huge aspect of exactly what you're talking about there. So that shed that you've got of ours is off a buck we called Pretty Boy. There you go. You have it right there?
Right here. Yeah. But there's to be fair, we haven't colored it yet, but we'll get them colored up. You'll look just like brand new. Yeah,
I've missed you.
I have missed him. That's awesome. Well, so like what's going to happen with this deer, Klaus, is even though I missed him, I skipped one off of his shoulder blades at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon at 20 yards.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
We've got just such a memory of that deer, and we've got trail camera pictures from your out. And so like I've got a wall at my house. It's a beautiful photograph of like the river bottom where that buck was living at. And so like to complement that, like, and to preserve the memory that I have of Jeremy and I recovering that antler, of me missing that deer, of us spending time down in that river bottom, is actually, you can probably see in the bottom of that shed, there's a hole that I've drilled in it.
Yes.
There's a company called Rack Hub. We're actually going to talk to Dwayne a little later today. And so that is a really nice system for being able to mount that antler to the wall.
Sure.
And so on the wall, so on that wall, I'll have the antler, the picture of the, the river bottom where we hunted them. And it's like that is the memory. And so even though I didn't kill that deer, it's not a mount, that's our hunting experience. Yeah. And so like you've given us an opportunity to kind of like preserve that and restore it. And that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It means everything to you guys because it's surrounded with all those memories, and that's the whole joy of the whole business, or the things that we do. So they mean stuff. People look at some of my smallest deer I killed early in my career have the greatest memories. That I look back on. It's not the biggest ones that bring the great memories. It's sometimes some goofy deer I shot. Well, one of my shot, he ran off of a rock embankment and ended up in a tree. He hung in the tree. The crotch of his, the back of his back end was stuck in the crotch of the tree. He never even hit the ground. He died in midair. It ended up in a tree. And when you mount that, it's just a little 1.5-year-old buck. But the story, it's like, how many times would that ever happen?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, goofy stuff.
That antler there, Klaus, is from public land in Kansas. And so we have some leases in Kansas, but I've got a sweet spot down on public. I've got a unique way to access it. We found this shed about 100 yards away from that one, Klaus, also on public land.
Yeah. Wow. We had already walked like 7 miles, and then we found those two within 100 yards of each other.
That's pretty. That's Pretty Boy, and we call this one Spider-Man. And we didn't draw last year, which was a heartbreaker, obviously, because we've got these deer running around. But while Pretty Boy may or may not still be around, he'd be 7 or 8 at this point. Mm-hmm. I think this deer was probably 4 when we found him, and so that would make him 6.5 this year, and he will be an absolute slob.
Magnum.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's so much fun, and there's always a new experience. It's never the same. It's always something changes, a twist to even if you hunt the same areas, this particular time this happens or that changes, and it's just cool. It's a lot of fun.
Well, listen, Klaus, we took a bunch of your time this morning. I know you gotta get a business phone call in here at some point, but man, we really appreciate you joining us today, and Jared and I just love being able to share conversations like this that are just
this has been so great. Yeah, just to know that like you love hunting. It seems like as much as we do, if not more. That's so refreshing to just meet like-minded people like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's by far. There's a lot of things I don't even start to pursue because I don't have time. Yeah, because I know it'll eat into this, and so I just decided pretty early in life to, this is going to be my thing that I just have such a passion for it, and say no to a lot of other things so I can enjoy this to the max,
100%.
So I guess, Klaus, kind of, and wrap this up, people can check out your stuff on what? Antlers by Klaus is the business? And so you do, there's Jared just showed the shed, fix that. You do replication as well for sheds and full deer, full antlers?
Yeah, we've actually, our business has grown. We have Antlers by Klaus. Now we have a company called Waters by Klaus where we do fish reproductions.
Oh, very cool.
That's been open now to the public for about, I think we're into our 4th season.
Okay.
3rd or 4th. And then we also have a company called Natures by Klaus, and we do wildlife displays. We're doing a lot of work for Cabela's and Bass Pro right now. And we do private trophy rooms and museums and so forth.
Very cool.
All over Canada and North America. We got one in Georgia coming up here in about a year, a big project there. So yeah, the company has really grown and diversified, and we do all sorts of things.
Awesome.
So I'll never live long enough to enjoy all that.
Well, you teed it up, man. Who would have thought a drywaller from back in the day would be leaving this kind of
living the dream? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, again, Klaus, we appreciate you coming on HUNTR Podcast today.
I appreciate your time.
And thank you again for everything. And we'll make sure that people get over to the site and check out some of the work that you've done.
Okay. I appreciate it, guys. Have a great day now.
Thanks, sir.
Klaus, thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Antlers.
Yeah.
By Klaus.
Very cool. Very cool, man. It's just so it's so nice to like just to talk to people that love it as much as you do. And like he clearly does.
Yeah. And what's cool about Klaus is obviously like this guy, we talk about big deer a lot. This guy's literally seeing the biggest of the biggest deer. Like that's what
on a daily basis. That's what he does.
That's what he's reproducing. That's what he's doing artwork and murals for. I mean, it is the biggest of the biggest deer of all time. And like you think about the number of deer, like I forget when James Jordan buck was actually shot. It was 40s or 50s or something like that. But think about the number of bucks that have been harvested and have existed in the United States and Canada since then. And there's like a handful of them that are like bigger than that deer.
It's amazing.
Crazy.
And I suppose devil's advocate on that. Like, who knows? How many of them deer have been killed and just not ever.
Well, and I think that's the interesting part because in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, I would say that more went unnoticed or undocumented. But since, let's say, 2000 and with the advent of social and how we communicate nowadays and text messages and stuff, I'm pretty sure every big buck either gets seen or found or a picture of, or for the most part. Maybe when you get into the expanses of Canada and stuff, not so much. But like I even look in Kansas, we had a buddy who found like a 250-inch deadhead. As soon as that got out, I think at the Kansas Monster Buck Classic several years ago. Like
we have a friend that found a 250.
Yeah, Kev.
Kev found it. It was 250.
Yep. 250.
Which one?
The giant non-typical.
Not Superman or what do you call it, deer?
No. That super giant non-typical that he found.
Huh. I'm struggling to remember that.
Yeah. 250.
Interesting.
Yeah, giant. I think he actually has it in a full mount now. Or not, like a shoulder mount. Anyways, like once he got to the classic with that deer, then out of the woodwork, here came all these trail camera pictures and cell phone pictures of it. People knew about it.
Oh, dude.
They knew it existed. And that's in some very, very rural expanse country of southeastern Kansas.
Yeah.
So I just think with the way that we've come as a society, that's not to say that there aren't deer out there that are record-breaking deer that haven't been documented, but I bet they're few and far between. Most people have seen them, have a picture of them, sheds from them, found them as a deadhead, and like they know about it.
You know what I do think? Is like a sidebar to that is I think that there are deer that would break that almost every year that just never make it to maturity. Like you see how many deer, I just even just on my farm is a limited
170-inch type 3-year-olds
perspective. It's like, dude, I can guarantee, that deer gets another 3 or 4 years on him.
He'd be there.
He's 200. He's over 200 for sure. Like not uncommon,
Yeah, I mean, when I used to do check stations and stuff, I've checked, and it's because it's the only age class besides fawn that I know is I've checked multiple 10 and a couple 12-point typical 1-year-old deer that, given 4 years, would have been mammoths, probably 200-inch typical type deer.
Yeah,
just never got there.
Yeah,
got killed at 1.
Yeah, I think it happens all the time.
I do think that there's also deer out there, and people know, whether they're listening to this or not, people know that they've either found sheds and or even like the deer that I hunted in Columbus. Like if that deer makes it, I don't know if he'll typically tip that record. He will net over 200 typical. So I know about him, and other people have seen him now and know about him. So, I mean, it's not this hidden gem or this hidden secret. Like, that deer exists, and I'm sure there's several others like him in the state of Ohio even.
Dude, it's so cool to, like, unearth the stories of, like, some of these deer, some of them that never even got killed, or, like, we don't know ultimately what happened. Like, dude, this giant 8-point on the table is, like, an awesome example of that. We found both of those sheds. They'd probably been laying out there for 2 years.
2 years.
That's That's 80s. A mid 180s 8-point at least.
Yep.
At least. That's a giant.
Yep.
And I would love to know, if people shot at that deer, if, there's trail camera pictures of him floating around out there somewhere.
Did he roll just into the river and die? And float away?
Who knows?
fall apart.
Is he out there right now? Is he 12 years old?
Oh, several. Well, yeah. So Super Freak was the other one you were talking about. Yeah. That was a mid 180s deer, and I think he was 4 at that time. I mean, a mammoth, and he got hit by a semi truck.
Did he?
Mm-hmm. That's what killed him.
Yeah, they found him under the.
Yep. And so there's probably a handful of deer that I knew. There was a deer. In fact, my dad and I were talking about it the other day. I was probably 14 or so, and this is in Westmoreland County, where I grew up hunting. Last day of bow season, right? And these does come behind me. I'm in a 6-foot man-made ladder stand, right? Last day of bow, these does come by, and this giant, non-typical. And I'm talking, at that time in retrospect, his frame probably wasn't bigger than 140 or 150 inches, but that deer had stickers and kickers everywhere. Looked like he had just a bush on top of his head. And I remember seeing that deer and thinking that's the biggest deer I've ever seen, and vividly. And it ended up, my dad was down for me, and it ended up going past him too without a shot. Said the same thing. And it's I never heard about that deer, never ever heard about him again. Nobody's ever mentioned him. It was my dad and I were the only ones on the face of the earth that saw that deer. And we would talk about it, and nobody else saw it. Nobody else heard. And it was in a very populated area. So I know people had seen it.
For sure.
Maybe they didn't comprehend how big. Did he get shot? Did he get hit by a car? Did he just die in the woods somewhere and rot and nobody ever found him?
Yeah.
Those deer exist, and everybody's probably thinking about a certain deer in their head that they've had experiences with, camera pictures with, or something, and then it just vanish.
Yeah. That's one of the coolest parts about expanding your range. And so if if you're hunting a piece of property that's whatever 40, 100 acres, to make relationships with your neighbors and then even go out, you get into a 5-mile radius type of a deal, whether you have permission to hunt there or the people, you can learn a lot about how deer travel. Yep. Dude, that deer goose that I hunted for a long time was a perfect example of the guy that killed him, never seen him before, killed him
we met the guy
3-4 miles. Yeah, we ended up meeting him years later.
He's oh yeah, I'm the one that killed that, what'd you call him, bird or something? And you're like, goose? And he's like, yeah, that's
bird.
Him.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was like, this guy killed goose?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I shot him with on a gun, and so
as he was putting his Marlboro light out on his forearm.
Yeah. So Goose spent I've never had a more consistent deer. He was living in this little block of timber, and he was every day.
The bead was on him
every day for 2-3 years, and so he ended up killing him as a 5.5, 6.5-year-old buck.
Yep.
5.5. And
several miles.
So in that case, I was the guy with the information, and so he would be your guy in your situation there. He's it's just a giant buck showed up out of nowhere, killed him, and who knows? And so because we had that, I've got a network of it was Jed Coldwell that told me that the guy killed a deer, and ultimately we leased that property, and he was cutting the hay off of it, and so it's small world. Eventually you end up meeting the guy that kills him, and it's hey, we've got a connection.
And not, no offense to him, pure luck, right? That deer moved multiple miles. He was in the right place as that deer came. He never knew that deer existed.
Yeah.
Just came by and he shot it.
Yeah.
Pure luck situation. And it happens more often than not. And somebody, I can't remember what it was. Somebody posted the other day, of a buck, man, I really hate, this is how I found the deer. And I'm like, man, I've been through so many of these situations, though. That is a better situation than just I don't know, that deer on the mountain, 4 years of history with, consistent, all the time, tons of trail camera pictures, boom, gone. Nobody's seen him. Nobody's killed him. Nobody knows anything about him. And it's just how does a deer like that, literally a world-class deer in this area, just vanish?
I think, there's some wisdom in what Klaus was saying. It's this deer is nocturnal. All I get is nighttime pictures. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a misobservation. The reality is that deer you're talking about is probably he may be dead at this point, but while you weren't getting pictures of him, he was just somewhere else.
For sure.
That's the trail camera information can be misleading because it's it's only in one spot, or the handful of spots that you've got it. And that deer has literally the entire world to
well, and that's
traverse.
it. I mean, we talk about it. That individual deer's behaviors will change, just like our behaviors as humans will change over time. And if you don't adapt or you don't try to adapt, don't expect to find them. And that's kind of where I was at. I had these cameras. This is where I always got them. He didn't show up for a season. I write him off as dead. He could be 2 squares over this way, a mile, and there he is. I don't have, how do you do that? Like, and do you just waste a month or two trying to track him down? And again, if he's not there, you ain't going to kill him. It's a weird situation.
Dude, that's what's so bizarre. Like, I don't want to change the subject here. I know we're getting ready to wrap up, but like, that's what's so bizarre about Western hunting. Like for us as Eastern, Midwestern whitetail guys.
Yep.
It's so much of like bits and pieces of information. It's like here and there. And then it's like so much scheming goes into it, or like, running cameras to get more information, or spotlighting here in Pennsylvania. You go out west, and like, so our experience is mule deer hunting and stuff is like, you see everything. Like, dude, you find a high point, you can watch a deer from sun up to sundown, and you can know exactly what he does, and you can put a plan together, and like that.
Yeah, I mean, in a week, we could pinpoint certain mule deer in that group that we were hunting just by looking at them. We're like, that's that big 3x4, or that's that big 3x2.
And I'm not saying it's easier. I'm just saying what a contrast, you know, to like whitetails. You never see them. It's all speculation, or what limited info you can get. And in those Western states, it's where they're at, what they're doing. It's just like, can you get close enough to get it done?
Gotta love it, man. Well, we appreciate Klaus joining us for episode 66 of the HUNTR Podcast.
And I'll be excited to get that antler back here pretty soon.
Yeah, all put together, put it up on the rack hub on the wall.
Maybe really if they send it out within the next week, I'll bring it in here for the next pod.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate Klaus joining us, and thanks for listening this week. We've got another antler type podcast coming up here next. So we're just going to keep them rolling and get out there, find some sheds.
All right, guys. Later.
Take me